You're listening to this episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment. It would greatly benefit the show. Hello and welcome to Movie Betters with the Farx brothers. I'm Kirk.
And I'm Kyle.
What was that?
Because you laughed, so I wanted to...
I always laugh when I do introductions. We're joined by Nora Peterson, cinematographer and director.
Hello, howdy.
In this segment, we'll be talking about the complete Tokyo 1964 Olympics film. That's right.
What did you call it earlier, though?
It's also known as just the Tokyo Olympiad.
The Tokyo Olympiad? Yes. This is the non-spoilers. How do we do a non-spoilers for a documentary?
Well, they don't know who won. You got to watch the movie to find out.
Well, I was thinking, never's a strong word. So when watching a film...
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Yeah.
That's absolute.
I think that having to know things, like from a book or from Fortnite, before you go into a film, for you to elevate its meaning, I think that's a success of the book and a success of the Fortnite, but not necessarily a success of the film.
Are you trying to dunk on Chicken Jockey right now?
No, God, I'm dunking on, and they're like, where did Palpatine come from? And they're like, well, did you not watch that one?
You thought Fortnite like the game?
Yeah, did you not watch that one Fortnite cutscene?
Yeah, I did watch the sequence on YouTube because I needed to know, and on that level of N-word, where it's like,
wow.
Nerd.
The N-word here is nerd.
Well, no, that's Chris Hardwick's jokes, not mine.
Oh my God.
And I'm going to keep using it that way. I used it very questionably a couple of weeks ago.
No, I'm just telling the audience because this might be their first episode.
Oh, every comic book could be someone's first comic book, Stan Lee. So your thought was that you could go into this film without knowledge and the film itself elevates it through narrative?
Yeah, so the film should be able to stand by itself without having to read a book, in theory, right? Or, there should be a portion of films that, you read the book and then the film is like an accompaniment for what you read, but then also films that don't do that. I know stuff now about this film from my research that I think is really interesting and kind of spoilery, but is not necessary to know before watching this film. So I'm wondering if we want to consider those facts or those tidbits of knowledge as the spoiler.
So we're gonna do two things. I want to do first, if that's all right. I always like to ask for consent. I'd like to go through the different versions that you're aware of, because I don't think that spoils anything, and also helps people who may or may not have heard of this movie that you could stop this right now and go watch on YouTube. But I'm not saying don't do that, because I don't know what your life is like right now. But I also like to try and give the guests their advantage over us.
Sure.
By you picked this movie. Why?
So I saw this film when I was in college, and it was when we were studying the elements of cinematography and the elements of image, which you can use to your advantage and control to tell your narrative or to isolate your perspective. And I loved this film because of how it is able to take an event that's happening in front of the camera people. Kon Ichikawa, the director, and
it was a Japanese person then?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Kon Ichikawa.
Ichikawa.
I think I'm saying his first name correctly, but
Kon.
Yeah, Kon is rolling in his grave right now if I'm mispronouncing it. But I think he's dead. Oh God. But
what if he isn't? Jeez.
You know what? Most dogs you've seen in movies from 20 years ago, dead.
I know. So being able to look at reality and then be able to still figure out where to place your camera and then how to sequentially edit something, and that's especially something that you're sequentially editing that is also a multi-day event, that is also a documentary, so there's only so much wiggle room you can sequentially move stuff around, I think is incredible. Because I think a lot of us grew up and we watch a movie and these movies are made on sets and people have a lot of creative control when it comes to, what the set looks like and what types of objects are in it and exactly who the extras are. And in this film, there was not very much of that control because Akira Kurosawa was tapped to be the original director. and he said, I want to direct the opening and closing ceremonies. I want full control. So sometimes with these Olympic films, the Olympic Committee funds them. So Japan's government funded this one. So the Olympics had, not as much of a financial stake. So the Japanese government said, no. And then he was let go from the project. And then they brought on Ichikawa because this was kind of his deal, was that he would be attached to projects that had a loose end, and then he would cinch it. He was kind of like the closer, as it were, allegedly, from what I read. But he comes in, and he is able to essentially elevate this reality to something that's not false, but also as he sees it, and as these camera people see it. And I thought that was just endlessly fascinating, and it has informed my cinematography style and how I'm not discouraged by looking at reality and thinking, oh, this can't be a movie because there's no set or whatever. It absolutely can. You just have to, I suppose, think of all the possible angles, search for all the possible ways to isolate the elements of craft. It is also unlike anything I have ever seen. And in that regard, it still remains one of my favorites and one that I think about all the time before I start a project.
This is supposed to be a bait show, so I should be saying something against what you've said.
Hold on, I have a question though. How many hours of footage they actually captured?
Oh my God, that's a fantastic.
Google that, dear listener. When I was watching the opening ceremony, so it's interesting Kurosawa got axed over that. I was like, some of this must be reenactment or something, and I know it's. I knew it wasn't, because how would they reenact this and that sort of thing. And he would go on. He'd already made the Seven Samurai by this point in history. So that's the 50s. So we have since let filmmakers in some of these Olympic opening and closings direct, right? Do you know? Because there's the one where James Bond came in or something like that.
James Bond?
Yeah, when one of the Olympics were in England, there was something with the Queen, James Bond, Boris Johnson got hung from something, and then, screwed up peace deals after that. Well, I'm sorry. That's what I think of when I think of that silly-looking bastard. Sorry, Boris Johnson and your family. He was partying during COVID when he said other people couldn't. I don't know. People should listen to your interview segment to hear about, how that affected real people. I wish I disagreed, and I don't.
All right. Good deal. I'm happy we reached that consensus.
Tell us the different versions of this thing and why. Oh,
God.
Why?
Yeah. So Ichikawa had this essentially 3-hour cut. And he was like, this is my vision, and it very much, it's like the Olympics are happening, but it is part of this film, is what his original cut kind of is. And it tells a story that's different from what his financial backers wanted. And so the government of Japan and the financial backers were like, well, what is this crap, right? They were mad. And they're like, we want to see Japan winning. And that's it, right? Or, they were just like, what is this, right? They were not happy with it. So they cut it to about an hour and a half for the international release. And then I think there's a 2-hour cut for the intra-Japan release. At least that's how it was for a time. And then since then, there have been, subsequent releases of the full 3-hour cut. So on YouTube is the 2-hour cut released by the Olympics and says the Olympiad in its entirety. And that, dear listener, is false, because they are missing a full 45 minutes of the original film. And in addition, the original film is in Japanese and has Japanese text. Yes.
Oh, is that why the narration is so limited in the YouTube version?
Yes. And so the original is all Japanese. And I remember you had a question about, why this type of font. Again, that was for the West, as they did it that way. And
well, I was more like, why do they have to have American letters on? I was just thinking of that generally. And then Japan is called Nippon.
Yep.
And Nihon. Yep. Which really means the sun's origin.
Yes, or Empire of the Rising Sun, essentially.
Cool.
Which plays heavily into the visual themes of this film. So it kind of, if you imagine, if you will, a continuum of what these cuts represent. And on one end, with the hour and a half cut, it's very much like these people won, these people lost, the Olympics, hooray, the end. And then somewhere in the middle are these cuts that are like, here's coverage of the Olympics, the end. And then on the very, very, very far end, the original vision with the 3-hour cut, it becomes this film, this documentary about humanity and about kind of this dialectic of individualism and also humanity as a whole.
What's dialectic mean? I'm not that smart.
Kind of like two things at once, or like, you know, the possibility for the gray area where it's not so black and white, which is what this film does really well. And right in the beginning, it sets you up for, I suppose, these different, almost like not nesting dolls, but like spheres of things to consider. And it does this by showing you patterns and then also telling you things by omission.
Wait, by what they don't show, you're arguing is what they are communicating somehow.
Yes, so sometimes he'll use like a straightforward approach where it's like for example, he sets up this kind of two-part narrative right in the beginning where there are people flying in from around the world, and there's planes, there's athletes, and on the other hand, you have the torch coming in, right? So he doesn't hit you over the head with it like, oh, look, there's an A-B plot here, but very subtly, there's these two things happening in tandem with each other, and everyone's headed toward the same place.
Do you see people that are later featured in some of the...
Yes.
It's like a reality show.
Well, kind of. Except it's not, he does not focus on the person as like, you know, this is Bob Hayes and this is what he did and he's a winner. Instead, the way it's approached is these are people doing people things, and then, you know, you notice the compulsions of the shot put players, and very much a focus...
Wait, you see them earlier in that cut?
You might see them earlier. You'd have to have a really sharp eye. There's a couple of people who you see multiple times, but again, he doesn't really focus on any one individual person outside of the specific narrative he's trying to tell in a specific movement of this overall piece. And it's more about like the expressions and people as a whole, but then sometimes people, you know, their acts as individuals. And this is where there is portrait lenses come into play, where sometimes the shot will have unified focus when it wants you to either notice people as a whole, or sometimes when they zoom back out and noticing the background. And then intercut, especially in the beginning, with some of these is a soft blurred focus in the background and then an isolation of a subject. And so he goes back and forth between these two for you to essentially understand this dialectic that there are people here as individuals from different countries, but then together as a whole, they are part of something greater. And then also weaves in this other thread of people as their nations, then which also sets up some interesting visual narrative points when they get to the Parade of Nations.
I've got a bait for you there, but first I will start with what the movie starts with. The Olympics are a symbol of human aspirations. Aspiration, singular.
Sure.
My bait is that I think people watching definitely the 95-minute version, which you'd probably agree with, or people like my brother and I who watched
the 2-hour version, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with your ability to read into it. I disagree that 90% of people who saw it would take any of that away from it. Yeah. I agree that it's probably intrinsic, but not, you studied this stuff and you worked at NASA, you're not a student, like you're very smart. No offense, but like, you know, the general, you know, Joe Sixpack who may be convinced to watch an Olympics documentary. And sorry to pick on Joe the plumber again. Just, you know.
Wait, Joe the plumber has a six-pack?
Joe, he's got a 6-pack of beer.
Oh.
And he's a plumber. And like, we need more plumbers, electricians, and nurses. So like, if he's got a welding degree, honey, be excited. Sorry, not to go too far afield. So do you accept that I'm challenging your notion of what is being said intrinsically through the art of film?
Well, I feel like we had to watch the 3-hour version too, right? To make that comparison. I don't know, 45 minutes could add a difference.
Well, I think that you could see. So
Yeah.
I'm somewhat moved by the argument that seeing all the people come versus seeing the Olympic torch. I don't think, not spoiler to tell you, you're going to see the Olympic torch in this movie. I was somewhat moved by it coming, and I didn't expect to be moved by this because I'm rarely moved by documentaries. Not because I think they're bad. I like documentaries. I just not as easily moved by them as, say, I don't know, something with kids loving their parents or whatever.
A wild robot, something like that.
Oh yeah, like I told my wife she'd cry, and she did. Mrs. Farx, did you see Wild Robot?
I had to read The Wild Robot when I was a teacher, so I have read The Wild Robot, but I have not seen The Wild.
Mrs. Farx discovered the book when we were at the bookstore. Kirk was there.
Oh.
We had gone to a Open Doors in the Twin Cities event, and then gotten food, and then gone to the bookstore because that's the kind of metropolitan liberals we are, I guess. I don't consider myself a liberal, just so that's out there.
That's not a big secret.
What?
No, I doubt it's a big secret. People know your political allegiance.
My political allegiance to, I have two hands, therefore I have two middle fingers. Sorry. Nora, do you have a rebuttal to my pushback?
I would agree that, some of it you really have to look at and understand what you're looking for. Like, I don't think, even in the 95-minute cut, I don't think people would put two and two together that a lot of what's being said is about, what did I write here?
Look at your notes. This
I have to look at my notes
smart
here.
guests bring notes. We write notes, but really good ones bring notes.
The sun, destruction, rebirth, and ascension are all kind of within that first 30 minutes. And, I think you can definitely enjoy the film without noticing those things. I think there's something, primal's not the right word, but intrinsically stimulating the way in which it is shot, where you pay attention. And you don't really have to know why, because the way it is shot, everything is complete. In the sense that there's a string being pulled that is withholding information from you, and there's tension, but you don't, that's one of, I feel like, way, way, way more ancient instinct is to feel tension than it is to, necessarily be literate in certain ways that require context. For example, when the runner with the torch is ascending the steps, it's extremely constructed because it's all about line, it's all about withholding information here and here. It's a tight shot. There's people on the side doing things, and it's just up, 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 and you don't know where the top is. And they let that shot run really, really, really long. And I think even if you don't understand that, the ascension, flight, the sun, who that guy is, because I didn't even know who that guy was until I looked it up. And I'm like, wow, that's actually really cool. But
who's the guy? I didn't look it up.
So he was born in Hiroshima when the bombs fell.
Oh, fuck.
And then grew up to be this runner. And they chose him to light the torch as, this symbol of growth, rebirth, and change. Because, foreigners were not really allowed in Japan. And so they were opening up the country, opening up the borders, in 20 short years, reestablishing how they wanted to introduce themselves to the world. And so they chose this man who survived, and not only survived, but also is now carrying the torch that made it all its way. And that shot with Mount Fujiyama, where the torch is being carried at the bottom, that's one of my favorites of all time. Yeah, you don't have to pick up on all of that to know that this moment is really important, because other shots, are taken back, there's more, in them, but this one is very tight, very constrained. It is different from the others. And so, I feel like, you would have to be either not really paying attention at all, or, maybe not have whatever pituitary gland that goes, hey, cortisol, but so yes, there's a level where you can enjoy this film and the minutia, but then I also think there's so many layers. And even, if you just were paying attention to it from the textures and the color and the sounds, I still think you would understand that there's more to this than just winning and losing.
You backed yourself into a bait. It's specifically on metatextual information.
Sure.
But
Well, I was gonna say if they had more of a narrative structure, I know if they didn't, you can't, because it's the Olympics and it's a competition, you can't, rig it so that Japan wins most of the medals. But it would have been nice to see the focus on Japan. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is South Bay. I do like that it's global. It's everybody coming together. Japan is not the main focus. But I would have liked to see Japan be more focused in this movie, because it is the Tokyo Olympics. It should be a story about this is Japan coming back right at you, right after World War II. They're rising back up.
It's not right after. It's 19
yeah, you know what
years
I mean.
After they,
It's a few years after, like 2 decades after, right?
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
I think that would have been great, but I guess that would have been too much to cover in 2 hours.
That's my meta argument against what the young genius has brought here is that if you don't go in knowing that World War II happened and how it ended, P.S. It's between the two movies Barbenheimer. If you watch Barbenheimer, you'll find out what happened in 1945. Yeah. So I'm glad I watched Oppenheimer, the prequel to this movie.
Yeah.
I should stop saying things like that because Oppenheimer is not the prequel to Godzilla, and continuing to say that is, mean.
It's all connected.
Well, I mean, it is all connected because Godzilla is a manifestation of the fears from the nuclear bomb. Have you seen Fabelmans? I'm going to pivot for a second.
I have not seen the Fabelmans. I know of the Fabelmans.
You should see the movie The Fabelmans. I'm going to ruin the last scene for you by telling you what happens. It's David Lynch playing John. I've got John Hurt stuck in my head, but that's an actor. It's the famous director, John. Someone will remember during this. And he's talking to young Steven Spielberg stand-in, and he's going, so you see this? This isn't interesting, where the landscape, like the edge of the land is right in the middle of the frame. Mm-hmm. You either need it here in the top 2/3 or here in the bottom third. And that's interesting when it's there or there. And he's telling young Steven Spielberg this in, the way only David Lynch could reenact a real person. Yeah. And then the last shot of the movie is the landscape. I think it's a street or something, and it's in the middle of the frame, and then the camera adjusts so that it's in the lower third.
Yeah.
And so when you describe the shot of the torch runner, I thought of that. It's like, oh man, I learned that from the Fabelmans. She's very right on that. But here's this metatextual, so you can respond to the metatextual stuff we're arguing, I guess.
Dear listener, I got through like maybe half of the 3-hour cut before I came here because I realized today that there was a 3-hour cut.
When you texted me, I was very charmed by that, but I was waiting for a guy who won an Olympic gold medal to hit me in the face. So that's a true story.
The first 40 minutes, a lot of that is about Japan. And really subtly. And I think you wouldn't need to even know what Japan was as a country or even their histories for a couple of reasons. The pattern and the length and the duration, the sequence, points out some very specific moments that even if you didn't know what these countries were, for example, during the Parade of Nations, most countries get the same cinematic treatment during the parade.
Yeah.
It is straight on, and that allows them to come through, and then you see the dress, the disposition, you get an idea of who these people are. And it's pretty much the same, with some notable exceptions. And one of the exceptions being the countries that only have 2 athletes. They shoot it from a lower angle against the crowd, so you understand that it's these 2 guys, or these two groups of 2 against the rest of the world, essentially, for representing their countries. And then another notable exception is the United States, who, when they come in, they don't even show the flag first. They show, so dear listener, the parade occurs from the entrance coming in to the upper left of the screen, coming down to the lower right in a curve. And so when the United States is introduced, it is a direct cut to people walking from the lower left to the upper right, and all you see are cowboy hats marching in that direction. And part of this is because the United States had the most contenders that year. Again, something that is said in the narration, but also not necessarily important, because it is a clue that there is something going on here, that the United States is something different. And then they have the shot a few seconds later where it's the United States and the USSR right behind them. And they are both some of the largest groups in the room. And so again, like, I don't think you need to necessarily know what happens during the Cold War or anything like that. Just from these shots alone, it's different. It is singular. And I think, you know, again, like, it doesn't always mean causation or whatever, but there is a point to point out very specific and intentional directorial choices that make you go, what is this? And then the third exception is Japan, when Japan comes in and everyone stands up. So even if you didn't know what Japan was, you think about the wrecking ball in the beginning knocking stuff down, followed by the parallax of these large, beautiful buildings, followed by the rising sun, and then
Wait,
flags.
that's a parallax?
So parallax is when you have lines, and then you move, and then the background moves slower than the foreground.
Oh, okay. When I think of parallaxing, like in cinema, I think of the example I have is Creed 3 when he's throwing certain punches, and like it slows down and then speeds up all of a sudden. It might be parallax because what you're describing is the background to the foreground, correct? I think it does do that, but now I'm realizing that I just experienced the effect in a different way. Also, since you're an anime person, Michael B. Jordan, director of Creed 3, which I can tell you haven't seen, is big into anime, and it influences some of the direction early on in the parallaxing and then in the later part of the fight. Sorry.
I got you.
Wait, quick question.
Yeah.
When the United States is winning shit, are you like a little bit like, fuck yeah, or nah?
Well, so I know from Wikipedia that they won the most medals, which is because they also had the most participants. So statistically, you know. I'd say that the movie, if it tends to camouflage that, because that's not what the story is about. Like Bob Hayes, who was the winner of the 100-meter dash, which is the first event they show. So what they do is you know, there's this theme of ascension, then there's these birds flying, there's flight, there's this plane that's doing the loop, the Olympic rings in the sky. There's this upward...
Chemtrails.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Woo, 60s. It ties back into, you know, the flight of the flags. It ties back into the flight of the participants getting here. It's all coming together, and it's this fever pitch of what he's been working, the Ichikawa is trying to say for the last 30 minutes. And then it's in Latin, the higher, faster, stronger, and then immediately moves into the men's 100-meter dash with Bob Hayes running at full speed for a qualifying heat. So you see him moving at full speed. You know how fast he is. That's not the story they're trying to say here, because then it goes into these shots showing their mannerisms, showing, you know, the expressions on their faces, on his face. And you hear the knocking of the rope against the flagpoles during this time. And so what was once a symbol of like everyone coming together in unity and the sound of all these flags flapping in the wind, in context with their somber faces, it's the pressure of all of those people against you, right? And so then they show his race in slow motion because they're letting all these emotions play out. They are watching you, they are letting you see his every single muscle contraction as he just sprints towards the end. And spoiler alert, he wins. And then...
What was his name?
Bob Hayes. Then he's on the podium. The cuts for when people are on the podium are maybe less than a minute to show.
Oh, they're definitely less than a minute.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's still
like,
America, and I'm like, fuck yeah.
Well, yeah, no, like, so it's you know, the movie's not saying you're not allowed to be proud and awestruck. It's adding this universal context to the sport, and you know, is also why it's considered a milestone in documentary and sports cinematography, and it changed how sports was filmed.
This is 1964. That makes sense.
Yes, and actually, this was the first games to be live broadcast around the world, and so it would be interesting to see how the broadcast coverage of the events differed from the film, because that will tell you essentially all you need to know about the groundbreaking variable, which is the question. But, of course, if you think about the 60s and you think about, the techniques being used, and they had to have like hundreds of camera people, you'd be able to really dial in on it though if you got your hand on one of those broadcasts.
So do you guys want to go in the socio-political direction or the sports and technology direction?
Oh my goodness, that's a fantastic question. Could you give me a little taste of both?
The socio-political direction would be, I would use the movie September 5th, the 1972 Munich Games. There's a movie that came out last year specifically about how you said this was the first one televised. The largest mass broadcast, I think, was in like 72 or something like that. It was definitely to more places than it had been, and that's when the terrorists came and did their terrorism in the Munich Olympics.
As terrorists do.
And I mean, I'm not saying that specific act of unrest could be related to anything today. Definitely wouldn't want to go down that direction. But just like the use of like the televised nature of sports and how it's being like, this is something they were talking about on the news. Here's how we did in the Olympics today. And we all pretend like the Olympics are important every 4 years.
Yeah.
I like the idea that it's not about pretending jocks have meaning in their lives. It's about sorry, that's really terrible.
That's your diction.
It's about seeing the aspiration of humanity.
It's about the human spirit. Come
Yes. And as the ending quote says, it's about bringing peace to the world through some of these things, even though the Olympics themselves are brought. And sorry, that made me go into like, how Larry Nassar was an Olympic coach?
Yeah, no, I saw that and I'm like, man, yeah.
Well, do you know why the FBI didn't interrogate him as closely as they should have?
Oh my God,
Because
why?
the FBI, and this is well reported, you could go look this up. The FBI agent wanted to get a job with the Olympic Committee. So he didn't look at like, how did Larry Nassar get to do this with over 100 women? It's because the FBI investigators wanted to get in closer with the Olympics, like how the FIFA. So I'll go the other direction because I can tell this is too dark.
Well, before we switch over,
No, please.
Very, very quickly, I do think that, I don't know if you've seen the movie Roger and Me by Michael Moore, which is a fantastic documentary.
I like Michael Moore's documentaries when he made them.
It's one where he's not as much of a central character as he is, still behind the camera, still a narrator. So it's a little bit of a different flavor. But that one's also masterfully crafted. But on a scale from...
Wait, that's not the one about Flint, Michigan being screwed over, is it?
Yes.
Okay, that's the one about Flint, Michigan being... That's like his first one that put him on the map.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I love his callback to U-Hauls, like in the film, just very subtly all the time. And I'm like, oh my God. But
Can you summarize Roger and Me for folks who... Because even my conservative adopted father would probably agree with the notion of Roger and Me and how globalization fucked over the people in Flint, Michigan. Isn't it something like that?
Yeah, so Roger and Me is Michael Moore, who is from Flint, Michigan, returning home after, I think he was fired from his San Francisco magazine gig. And so he was there with not a lot of prospects. And Flint, Michigan at the time, in I believe it was the 80s. Before that, they were very reliant on this GM facility, this General Motors facility. And so this story is about when GM decided to put its profits over its people, significantly, what happened to people in Flint, Michigan, and how some of them had to turn to like breeding and killing rabbits, and then like literally like crazy stuff.
Deindustrialization does nasty things to any population.
Yeah, and so this, you would think that, this documentary is all doom and gloom. It is a little bit. It's darkly funny because of the way Michael Moore puts his spin on it, where I like, not very many things like put my jaw on the floor. There were parts in this movie where I was just like, oh my God. Like there's a reason why it's like an official like Library of Congress, like, you know, like
let's be careful with that.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I think Animal House is in there. So
okay, yeah. Okay.
I love Animal House.
Never mind, dear listener. Dear listener, it's a movie worth watching, and it is
definitely.
It floats the line between entertaining and really sobering, which I think is important for when you're listening to material that's dark that you should care about, because it sticks with you. What I meant to say was that it is acknowledged that the reality of what Michael Moore recorded and then how he artistically arranged those pieces. Again, we're going back to the continuum here. If the Tokyo Olympiad is pretty faithful to the events of the day, maybe to the medium to the opposite end of that is Roger and Me. Not because none of it isn't true, and this has been said before, is that not everything in it is chronologically correct. Not everything is, you know, direct A to B. It has been critically examined as a completely true movie. And so that was the point that I wanted to make, where that the Olympiad does a fantastic job of elevating what's already there, probably as much as you can before you get into the territory of inventing, whereas Roger and Me leverages the absurdity of what is happening to Flint into spinning a yarn that is 100% true, but its actual factuality in terms of chronological order can differ, if that makes sense.
Wait, so they didn't relay events and how they chronologically played out?
A lot of it, I think another, how do they put it? A lot of it is Michael Moore's vision for it, his personal bend to it. He didn't get people to necessarily say things they didn't mean. If you're drawing a portrait of a flower and you have a square canvas, that's different from taking your canvas, cutting it out into a flower, and then painting it yellow.
Well, here's my bait on that, is that the Daily Show probably took that even further than Moore did, where they interviewed real people who said real things, but they also didn't replay the interview in a chronologically true way. I don't think Michael Moore's Roger and Me crosses over into what the Daily Show used to do, where they would record people who would say real things, and then they would sometimes record different interview questions to go along. I mean, Real News does that too.
Yeah.
But have you seen the movie Broadcast News?
No, I haven't.
I'm not saying, hey, go watch the other two movies I said so far. I would recommend you go and watch Broadcast News. I have a copy. I'll loan it to you.
I forget how we got here, but I remember just wanting to say that, yes, how we watch sports and the industry of sports is completely different from how it was in the 60s, like a lot of stuff, because that's like damn near, you know, billions of years ago. But I think what's an important asterisk is that at this point in time, all Olympic athletes had to be amateurs.
Yes, they couldn't be pros.
Correct. So a lot of these people were just everyday people who just tried out, and they were like, get in here, right? And that was the same for the, you know, Miracle on Ice team. None of those people were pro. You know, I think there is definitely, you know, money to be made, as, you know, there usually is when you, or, you know, there is something in it for somebody, the somebody being Japan. I do think it's a different flavor than what the Olympics are now, which is an industrial complex that supports trainers, advertisers, sports drinks, sports medicine, and people who are heavily sponsored, who are paid to train from a young age to then show up on a world stage to not necessarily only compete for their country, but also compete for their version of industry. And that's much, 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 much different than the Olympiad, where it's just average-ass people who probably practice in their backyard.
Well, they're not average-ass people because they, you know, they were genetically gifted and they had trained enough to beat other people from their nation. What you're talking about is the perversion of a system towards economic interests that nation states may or may not develop for a variety of reasons.
Yes, and so like the whole concept that talent could come from anywhere, that was especially true when they, you know, were looking for amateurs, is that people were like, it was not unheard of for people to be like, yeah, I kind of just started running last year, and then, oh, look at me, I'm in the Olympics, right? Because, there was more of that, right? Because you didn't have to buy into this organizational hierarchy that has become modern sports.
Did you play sports in high school?
I was on C team soccer for my high school for 1 year.
C team meaning?
There was C team, B team, JV, and then varsity. I was the C team soccer, and
freshman or sophomore?
I was, I think I was maybe still in middle school.
Oh.
I don't remember. It was such a, I hated it. Because nobody was having any fun. No one was having any fun, and the boys coach at the time was really weird, and
Yikes.
probably should be in jail. But
Larry Nasser.
and no one was having no fun, and everybody was mean, and I was like, I don't like this. So I went back to I played rec soccer for like 12 years, and I did that every summer, and I loved it, and I was a goalie for soccer.
That's the most sensical thing you've said, is that you were a goalie.
Yeah.
I'll talk about the technology and sports thing at the top of the spoiler.
Thank you for listening. For more on JK Productions, find us on Instagram at JK Productions Team and on Facebook, JK Productions MN.